This is Tracy Hales-Vass with Right on Four Corners. Today I'm excited to talk to Craig Childs about his last book and his upcoming release, Atlas of a Lost World and Virga and Bone. Hi, Craig.
Hi, Tracy.
Well, I really enjoyed reading Atlas of a Lost World and Virga and Bone. And you're right, as you told me, they're very different books.
They are, in a lot of ways.
They are, and both in the same year. I'm pretty impressed by that.
Well, one took much longer than the other.
I'm sure of that.
They were entirely different endeavors.
Was Virga and Bone written consecutively, or did you take essays from around and about and put them together?
That's all pretty much new stuff, all written consecutively. There were some stories that have appeared in parts of articles, but none of it was lifted. So everything is written fresh, and most of it was just written on the spot as that book was being created.
Well, I know you do write on the spot. I mean, I've hung around with you a little bit and seen your writing on napkins and tickets and the back of your hand and whatever.
Yeah.
Which is what you do, right?
Whatever's nearby.
Right. And in Virga and Bone, you talk about a little place that you got to sit and write in. Yeah,
a friend's place out on the edge of Tucson. He just had this a small empty house, basically had a table and a bed. I brought the rest. I found a chair and a dumpster, and that was good.
You were good. So when you do write as you do, is it an effort then to actually sit down, transcribe it all into a sensible format and send it to a publisher?
Yeah, it's. I mean, some parts of it are easy and flow, and some parts of it I really pore over. I mean, these two books. One took 5 years to write, and it was a lot of that, a lot of back and forth with the editor, back and forth with my own, editorial self. That's where I spend most of the time, is back and forth on the page and working and reworking. Whereas Virga and Bone, the bulk of that I wrote in a week, and it was just straight onto the page. But then, after that, there is a lot of sitting down and really pouring through it. And of course, as the book is getting ready to go to press, I'm doing all the last desperate, add this, take this out, change that sentence, no, that word needs to be over here, change that comma, and then it's out of my hands. I'm going, wait, there was more, and it's gone.
Well, before we go further, why don't you give our audience a little bit of a synopsis of both books?
Okay. Well, Atlas of a Lost World is about the Ice Age in the Americas, mostly North America. I touched a little bit on South America, but I basically went out to follow where people would have entered this continent, different points of entry at different times, and I went to the places where archaeologists and paleontologists have found evidence. So I could stand in a place and say, okay, it happened here. There were mammoth hunters here, or there were people building fires in the Ice Age here in this spot in central Alaska. And this book ended up carrying me all over the place, from the coast of Siberia to the Florida Panhandle to New Jersey, Oregon, Nevada, because Ice Age remains, Ice Age sites are all over the place, and so I tried to piece that together and say, this is what it looked like in the Ice Age in North America. This is how different it was. This is who showed up and when, and what kind of genetic history they had, what kind of language they would have been carrying. Here are signs of ceremony, of tool use, and here's how an empty half of the world gets populated. So I spent this book on foot or in a boat or in a plane. There were a lot of different ways of getting around, looking at how this all came to be, how North America was populated by humans for the first time.
And you intersperse it with personal contemporary now happenings.
Yeah, because I really want to. I didn't want it to be isolated in the past and inaccessible. I wanted to say, well, here we are in the 21st century. This is what we're like. This is what our families are like. What our gear is like. This is how much different we are from 10,000, 20,000 years ago, and this is how much hasn't changed. So I really wanted to make sure that the now that we're in at this moment was connected to the now of the Ice Age. So I brought in, live human beings to say, here we are. We think that we're at some kind of pinnacle, but we're on our way through history, just like they were in the Ice Age.
I like the interweaving of it, bringing us back in and then back out. Works really well.
Well, it's important for me to use ourselves now as scale, because I think you can look into the past, especially the distant past, 1,000 years or more, and just say, oh, there were people, but they weren't like us. They had different sensibilities. They were more primitive, and what I'm often trying to show is that they weren't more primitive. I mean, maybe technologically, but it was still, that's the height of their technology at that time, and they basically had the same capacity for emotion and intelligence as we do now.
Right.
So I want to make sure that we know that.
I think that's the main thread there that really pulls it all together. Here we are. We're just like them in so many ways.
Yeah. And then Virga and Bone was, that was much more of just a purely passionate piece, kind of a love letter to the desert. It's about the American deserts. I didn't touch too much on the Chihuahuan Desert. I have a lot of experience there, but it was more Sonoran, Colorado Plateau, Mojave. The idea of the book was to say, here are the elements of desert. Here are the things that you will always encounter. When I was first coming up with this book concept, I was thinking of it almost as gods, or here are the deities of the desert. The first chapter is Virga, rain that is falling but doesn't touch the ground, and that, to me, that is part of the desert. It is, it's what you see when you look at the horizon so often, and that is one of the beings, one of the entities that lives in this desert. And what is it? How does it work? How do you encounter it? And so I took these different elements and looked at my own stories from the past and said, okay, here's a really good Virga story. Here's an encounter that I had that reveals it. It's a series of singular pieces that you would find in the desert.
And one thing I really like, too, is aesthetically, you end one chapter with a term that starts the next chapter.
Ah, you saw it.
I did. I like that.
Yeah, I wanted them to move all together, because it is, you can pick these pieces out, but really they're all attached to the landscape and to time and to people's stories. So I wanted there to be this constant connection.
Right, connections. Even though there's so many different aspects of the desert, the dry bones and the Virga that never really comes down, and the search for water. And the cover painting is special too on Virga and Bone.
That art it's all little pieces of bone, and Claire Taylor is the artist, and she did the art throughout the book, and I love just its orderly little gathering of bone fragments, which is, that's, you take a walk for 20 minutes in the desert and you will find every little thing that's on the cover.
And I love the line, you can pick up a scapula of a deer and use it as a fan, because there's just no more odor.
And as so many people know, you can pick up the pelvis of a cow or a horse or an elk and wear it on your head.
Right. Exactly.
If you have kids, that's what they do immediately.
Right. Right.
They don't hesitate. They say, "Oh, this is a mask. Let's wear it."
Right. Now, I know that you do sketch yourself, but in Virga, it's Claire's drawings throughout.
Yeah, we talked about using some of my sketches, especially the last chapter was when I was walking along the coast of mainland Mexico in northern Sonora and drawing everything that I was finding, crab carapaces and shells and feathers, and I have a journal packed with these. And we talked about including them, but it seemed like Claire's work was doing a good job at what we were trying to do with this book, so I left my drawings out of it.
One of your stories in there is about flying. Is that the same pilot that you flew with in your previous book?
Yeah, in Flying Home.
Right.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine who has this old cloth wing, tiny little plane, a Cessna tail dragger from the mid-40s, and we do things with it that one probably ought not to do with a little plane.
Right. Yeah.
We have that's our vehicle for getting out, and we fly out and land on old uranium strips.
Wow.
And take off with packs from there. So yeah, that's the same one.
Yeah, after having Flying Home, I recognized him there.
Yeah, he and I scouted a trip that I was doing with my sons, and we flew up a canyon and had a look at it. And then a few months later, I was doing the trip with my boys, and we were 8 days deep into it, and I'm in the middle of the canyon. There's no trail, and it's tough going for a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old. Tough going for me. And I kept thinking, God, this looked easier from the air.
Right. So Virga and Bone comes out October 1st.
Yeah.
And Atlas of a Lost World's out now.
Yeah, it's in paperback now. It's amazing that these, one did take so long. I mean, it was a tremendous amount of research. Atlas of the Lost World was just a lot of travel and a lot on the ground. But writing Virga and Bone made me think that, man, I should write all my books in a week.
Yeah, if you could.
But Virga and Bone doesn't carry I had maps up on the walls for Atlas of a Lost World,
sure.
And was, I had strings tied between thumbtacks and was trying to put, just this incredible history back together, and a history that's really hard to find. I mean, it's the Ice Age is long enough ago that archaeological material, most of it is gone.
Mm-hmm.
70 to 90% is either destroyed, by erosion processes, or you're just not going to find it.
Right.
And so you're left with this 10% of data and piecing together an entire history of a continent. Really, the bulk of North American history happened before the Ice Age, and it was a big history. That there were cultures meeting in the Ice Age, and you could see technologies flowing from one to the next. So you know that there was a lot going on, and you have got saber-toothed cats and mammoths and short-faced bears. These gigantic bears. That's a lot to pack in. I think that's why it took 5 years.
It's very rich. So I know that you do most of your research as primary research on your feet, and then talking to other people. But do you find yourself actually pounding the books a bit also?
Oh, yeah. For Atlas, it was thousands of journal articles and interviews with researchers who are involved, and you can never do enough research. I end up using about 5 or 10% of what I'm actually researching, of all the information I'm gathering, because I'm just gathering so much, so I can, in the end, say, okay, I think I do have a concept of how this worked. But without the scientific input, without ethnographic histories, native histories, because there's a lot in the science, but then there's a lot in Native American legend, ethnography, stories, especially cosmology, where you're going back to the original stories of where did people come from, and then you see the stories of emergence, of coming up from another world into this world, and then you look at science and you go, hey, wait a minute, these things are telling the same story, just in different ways, different languages. A lot of my work for Atlas was the research. I'd say there was a lot more research than ground time. Well, I feel like going out and being on the ground is what pulls it together.
Right.
Where you can sit down and read the papers, and they're fascinating. I just love the research. I've had people offer to intern for me and say, I'll do your research. And I go, what?
No.
Get away from my research. That's my favorite thing. And so you spend all your time in a building reading, and then you go out and say, okay, what does this actually look like on the ground? Let's go to that site in central Alaska and stand there and look at that horizon, and that's where it really ties together, because you see what people saw 20,000 years ago. You see the same mountains, and you can fill in the blanks. You can say, okay, there were glaciers all over those mountains. They were right here at this site next to this river, and here are the bones of the mammoths that they were butchering. You're tying it to a place where place seems to be the time traveling device. Where if you stand there, you can also stand there now and 20,000 years ago.
And that's the way the book actually opens up, that you start off with the present and move into the past.
Yeah, because I don't think they're that far away from each other. I mean, there are plenty of times, I'm sure you felt it, when you walk out in the desert and you look down on the ground and there's a potsherd and you can see the painted design on it, and you go, oh, Pueblo ancestry. That was this 1,000-year-old or 800-year-old potsherd was part of a reality that was happening at the time and that is still going on. So none of these things have ever really ended. Right. And I guess that's something that I really try to get at in a lot of my writing, is just to say it's never over.
Right.
It never stops. It just moves from place to place.
And we are not it.
Yeah, we're carrying it. We're moving it. We're vehicles, but we aren't the destination.
Well, we've been talking a lot about Atlas, but I'd really like to hear you read some from Virga and Bone.
Let's see. This was when I was flying with my friend, the pilot, and it's a cramped little plane. And we were camped right around the Arizona-Utah line, and it was summer. The Navajo word for water is twa. The word shortened at the end, the sound of a drop of water landing. Virga is a Navajo koan, the sound of one drop, not landing, waterless for those down below. My word for water sounds like want, sounds like desire, which might not be so different from the Navajo. Can we fly through it, I asked. The pilot looked over at the sheen of drizzle, a single curtain. He judged distances and potential turbulence in the air that had been stable since we left the trading post half an hour earlier. He said we should find out, and tipped the plane, her wings shading us from the sun as we arced toward this floating steamship of a cloud and its diaphanous trailer. Entering the Virga was not as rough as we thought it would be. Expecting rattles and jolts, we instead sank into a well, our stomachs rising as we dropped. He increased power and lifted us back up. We could see raindrops, lone silver-gray beads streaking by. They hit the wings and passed my window, where I watched them fall, trailing several hundred feet before hissing back into air. One drop hit the rounded windscreen, then another, a fifth, an 11th. They were soft as cooked peas, as ripe as berries. Each became a small, staggering comet, heading around the plexiglass, looking for a way off, a way down, wanting nothing more than to meet the ground. The plane fell again as we crossed the Virga's middle, then fell once more, riding down a staircase, the veneered cloth wings catching us as the pilot throttled back up. Cooler air descended inside the falls, carried down by water droplets, causing the air to sink. Only a few more drops fell against the windscreen as we tilted out the other side. It was 5 seconds across, 1/10 of a mile thick. Virga, I can now say, is as velveteen as it looks. This was no downpour, technically a drizzle. I could have stood inside its rain and barely gotten wet.
I never knew about Virga until I moved to New Mexico, and it's an amazing phenomenon.
Really, that's one thing that when the book came together, I thought, do people know what Virga is? But if not, it's a good way to learn. And to be able to fly through it, it was just, and we were flying right over Monument Valley. It was just this one cloud that was kind of petering out from a storm the night before, and it was the only thing in the sky, and we headed straight forward, and it was just beautiful, arcing right through this. I'd always wondered what is Virga actually like inside,
right.
So I got my answer.
That's very cool, and you told us about it. Wonderful.
Yeah, and I feel like that's why I'm writing is that I encounter these things where I look up and say, "Oh my God, look, it's happening. Whatever it is, I'm here for the moment," which I think we all have. Everybody has, maybe every day, some moment where you stop and say, "Oh, it's happening." You know, the rain is starting, or the sun is rising, or whatever it is. It's always going on, and I just, as a writer, I feel like I'm just constantly exclaiming about it, going, look, it's Virga.
Right. Well, both books are, and also the Flying Home. You just keep writing. So what's next?
Well, I'm a lot.
I'm sure.
It's hard to tell which one. I'm actually I've got a number of projects going on all around the Southwest, but something I've been working on for some years now, which is an odd topic for me, is I'm writing about New York City.
Oh.
Because I've been traveling there for over 20 years now as a wilderness traveler. I go into the city with a pack, and I go trekking across it. And I still don't quite know why I do this, but it started when I was just living in the desert, living out of the back of a truck. I ended up going to New York for some reason and just went, oh my gosh, what's all this?
Right.
Because I hadn't been east of the Mississippi until my mid-30s, and so I hadn't been to the East Coast. And when I saw New York, I just thought, all my friends said, "Oh, this is going to be terrible for you. You'll survive, but you got to get out of there." And when I got there, I went, "Wow, there's something happening here."
Yes.
And so I treated it as a landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And something I often would do is do a long trek, say in the Grand Canyon for 2 weeks, and then come out, drive to Las Vegas, get on a plane, and be in New York by nightfall. And so I'd be in the same frame of mind that I was in for 2 weeks in the backcountry, and then I would just apply this to the human landscape, and I would move through it going, okay, how does this place work? Well, what is this kind of wilderness? So I've been writing a lot about that lately. It's just come up more. I've had a lot of very uncanny and curious experiences there, and I feel like I spend so much time writing about wild things that I really need to contend with the 8 billion, almost 8 billion of us on this planet and say, well, there's this going on also.
Mm-hmm. Which has its wildness to it in the middle of New York City.
Oh, yeah. I've been in situations
that
have been some of the wildest I've ever experienced. And I've been, as you know, I'm a foreigner there. It's exotic to me. I'm trying to learn the language. I'm trying to learn how people do what they do, and so I find, I guess I'm looking at humanity and saying, you know what, human nature is nature. You know, maybe it's magnified or twisted, but it's still natural. So what are we? What happens when we apply ourselves to a landscape entirely, where it's not nature as I think of it, but it's all humanity? What does that look like? So I feel like this is my keyhole into my own species and into my culture. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. This may be the last you hear of it.
Okay.
but I've been writing a lot about it lately.
I hope that comes to birth also. And on your website, House of Rain, you have a lot of blogs and articles and other samples of your writing.
Yeah, I put little things out there, and I write for magazines a fair bit. I write for a science writing blog called Last Word on Nothing, which is just a group of science writers, which the other writers are, I would say, more serious professional science writers. I'm more of an anecdotal science writer, but it's a weekly or daily blog, Last Word on Nothing, that just has incredible stuff from all these different writers. And so every week or two I have something in there.
So do you consider yourself, first of all, an adventurer and a writer secondarily, or vice versa?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when I'm having adventure, I'm primarily an adventurer. When I'm writing, that's all I'm doing. It's my life is a little. I mean, I write while I'm out. I guess I'm writing all the time. But then the writing, this may sound trite in a way, but the writing is an adventure for me.
Right. That makes sense.
Because I get so involved in it. It's its own experience, but I can't do it without on the ground experience. I have to be out there. So I would say it's just back and forth between the two. One creates the other, which creates the other. I write because of an adventure and experience, and then I need more. I need to understand something or go somewhere or see something, so the adventure happens again, and then I have to write about it, and it just kind of, they feed each other. They are, in a way, the same thing. It's just the writing is always about what I experience out there. So I can't have one without the other. I mean, even just sitting on a boulder, is an adventure.
Right.
Just looking.
Right.
Looking as an adventure, looking at the horizon, watching a day pass. It's hard to, even, the most mundane moments are sometimes the finest, the most beautiful. So that's where I find the adventure, and then the writing of it is just, how can I tell this story? How can I say what I've seen? How can I assemble words in a way that express just the phenomenal nature of what's happening in front of me? And I feel like writing, you get out a portion of what you witnessed. There's so much that's not in there. I think most of my stories are mostly, you just see what's not omitted.
Is that frustrating?
Well, I love the process, actually. It's frustrating in that I want to say everything, but then I realize, well, nobody wants to hear everything.
Right.
Everybody's already having everything. They are looking to my writing to get something in particular, not another person's entire life. And it's frustrating in that the experience is usually so much more than I'm saying. Because I want to constantly stop and go, but wait, that's not even it. Let me tell you what really happened. Like, let me tell you the big part of that day, and then I go, oh, that actually is not part of the story I'm telling. I'm trying to tell a very particular story. So it's like sculpting. You're chiseling away all the other parts of your experience to get down to something in particular. And I guess that's where it's not frustrating, is that when you get down to that hard kernel, you go, wow, this really is something here. So it's not just a replay of everything you experienced, but a very specific focus on this idea that you're pursuing, which will change the way they see it. And so in a way, I feel like the story becomes almost false compared to what actually happened, except you're getting at this one truth. If you're writing about archaeology, you're writing about ancient things, you're not going to be writing the other 90% of what happens during your day. And in that way, it's frustrating, because there are people who read my stuff and go, oh my God, your whole life is incredible. And I go, well, no,
not really.
You saw the best. Like I really really weeded that down to exactly these key moments that express so much.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're missing a lot of the richness. You're missing a lot of this because I didn't put it in there.
Wow. Well, unfortunately, we are running out of time.
Well, thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah.
Great. And, of course, listeners can find Virga and Bone October 1st wherever books are sold.
Yeah, it'll be out there, and it's a short read.
It
I
is.
think you could read it in a bathtub.
I think so. Yep, I didn't, but you could. Well, thank you, Craig.
Well, thank you, Tracy. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it, too. And that was the amazing and wonderful Craig Childs talking about Atlas of a Lost World, Travels in Ice Age America, and his latest book, Virga and Bone, Essays from Dry Places. This is Tracy Hales Vast with Right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM in Farmington, New Mexico.